Chapter 15 Reconciliation. Anne and the children had just finished a rousing game of slap bang, and laughter filled the tiny dining room. They were so taken with the game, no one had heard the front door open, or the sound of feet walking down the narrow hallway. Without warning, Karen stood in the doorway. She took in the happy sight for a few moments, and then Evan spied her. "Mommy, you're here! Come on and play with us." "I won this time. I had the best cards." He sprang up from his chair, raced around the end of the table, and launched himself up against her waist. She looks a little dazed, Anne thought, but dismissed it again, with an inward smile. "I have a feeling you've been up to something here, Lord. I knew that storm wasn't just an accident." "Karen," she spoke out loud now, "you're here. What's the occasion?" She stood to give her daughter a hug. "Is everything okay? I thought you'd work today." There was just something in Karen's face. "You look tired, dear. Sit down, sit down. I'll go make you a fresh cup of tea." Another quick squeeze, and she set off for the kitchen. A quickening in her heart set her to singing once more, the first thing that popped into her mind. "Oh, victory in Jesus, my Savior forever," she crooned as she took up the tea kettle and turned on the water faucet. "Funny you came here, Mommy," Evan chattered. "We've been here all afternoon. You should have seen it rain. Wow! I got to stand out on the porch for a while, but the wind started blowing, and I got all wet. So Nana said I should come in for cocoa, and then we played games for a long time." Evan's voice continued, but Karen's attention had focused on the blonde, bent head of her daughter, willing her to look up, wanting her desperately to acknowledge her. "Please, Hannah, please. I have so much to say to you, so much to try to explain to you, please." As though prompted, Hannah stopped counting the game cards and stilled her hands, then looked up at her mother. Like a dam opening, a stream of unspoken feelings began to pass between them. Promises that something would be changed, something made better, something healed. Part of the perpetual darkness that surrounded them, whenever they were together, lifted and was driven away. Neither were aware of what it was, but they both felt it. They stayed that way for some time. Anne in the kitchen singing her heart out. Evan clutching his mother's waist. A wise little boy that knew something maybe the rest didn't know. Karen and Hannah speaking from the soul and spirit, bypassing the frail miscommunication of the tongue they had so often suffered under. Drifting in from the living room, the sounds of Bird's clock announced the hour of 5 o'clock. A pert song, sparrows sweetly singing the time. Peace, that's what it was. Karen realized suddenly. Peace. Lord, her heart petitions, you've set my feet back on the rock today. Help me to walk this path. Show me the way. I don't have any idea how to cross this bridge, how to reach her. I don't know what to do. All I know now is I don't ever want to lose your peace again. And I can't lose my children. Help me, Lord. Make a way for us, for all of us. The telephone's sharp jangle burst into the air, shattering the still of the moment. Mike sprang to mind, and Karen hurried off to answer it. Life had come calling again. The battle had been won, but the war continued on. Anne's song preceded her from the kitchen, and she entered the dining room carrying a steaming cup of tea in one hand and a tiny porcelain cow filled with cream in the other. "Come, sit down a while, Karen," she called over her shoulder as she made her way to the table. She placed the cup, then carefully turned it so the handle was the perfect position to be picked up again. She frowned at it a moment, wondering if she should go back and get a saucer. A moment later, Karen returned to the room and stood uncomfortably between Evan and the table, not sure which direction to take. She'd been too late for the phone. She'd been afraid to pick it up and check on it. "Who is on the phone, dear?" She still had the deer in the headlights look in her eyes. "I don't know. The answering machine picked it up, and you don't have the sound on again." Karen tested a smile at her mother. Well, Anne shrugged her shoulders. They are there and you are here, and the children too. What could be more important than that? She adjusted the handle of the cup one more time, then drew it close to her daughter. You drink this now. It'll warm you right down to your toes. Karen walked to her mother and slowly drew out the chair next to Hannah's. Hannah had gone back to her counting when the phone rang, breaking the connection between them. Now she seemed to be studiously ignoring her. Do you think Mike would mind if I fed you all some supper? Anne spoke to the table, still thinking about the saucer. No, something is definitely more wrong than normal here. She went on to more important things. He said on the phone last night that he was terribly busy with work. He didn't bat an eye when I asked if the children could stay here this afternoon. Anne was constantly blamed for being overprotective, but she'd felt the atmosphere shift at least 3 times since Karen had walked in. She peered over at Karen with a smile more confident than she felt. Karen took the opportunity to refocus. No, it's fine that we stay. Really it is. She certainly wasn't anxious to have to explain anything about her husband. Not just yet. She didn't notice her own voice, the grateful tone, as spoke the words, but Anne did. Her eyebrows furrowed together, and she was just about to speak again when Karen continued. I have a few things to ask you about, Mama, okay? But not now. Later is fine. Suddenly, she felt his presence strengthening her. She could do this. We'd be happy to stay for supper tonight. A tiny victory won. Nana winked at Evan, who had been quietly standing in the same place all this time. Oh, wonderful. I made a big pot of my special beef stew yesterday. I was going to donate it to the church for the bazaar table, but then they canceled it until next month. Setting down the creamer cow, she wiped her hands in her apron and bustled back over to the doorway again. I couldn't imagine what I was going to do with all that. It'll just take a little while to heat it up for us all. She placed an arm around the boy's shoulders and told him, I could use some help in the kitchen, dear. Would you mind? Evan took off for the kitchen without a backwards glance. With a final smile at her daughter for encouragement, Anne toddled behind, calling out instructions to the boy beyond her. Hannah was seated along the far side of the walnut dining room table, just to the right and around the corner of where her mother's refreshment had been placed. Karen slid the chair the rest of the way out and sat silently. Her fingers began tapping nervously on the wooden arms that enclosed her space, looking for something to do. Tea. Both hands took up the chore and brought the steaming cup to her lips. One sip of the brew proved too hot and far too sharp, so she set the cup down again and poured in a little of the cream. Her eyes spied the sugar bowl in the middle of the table, but it was out of her reach, and she was hesitant to break the silence, to draw attention to herself by asking for it. Hannah had begun to assemble the game back together when her mother had first appeared in the doorway, and now her head stayed bent over the bundle of cards, aimlessly shuffling them from one hand to the other, pretending to sort them. She's so beautiful, Lord. Karen's eyes took in her princess for the first time in many months. The first real, long look. What she saw made her ache inside, realizing she had missed leaps of time in her life. When did she grow so mature? When did she start moving from child to this? Surreptitiously, she took it all in, the wave of her golden blonde hair drifting around her shoulders and spilling onto the edge of the table, the perky slope of her nose, the smattering of light brown freckles across it. Her eyelashes were so long. Her cheeks had lost their baby roundness, angling instead into the promise of loveliness. But her bottom lip was caught between her teeth at the moment, chewing gently on skin that was never meant to be so battered. From the look of her lips, it wasn't the first time either. Karen recognized it. Worry. So familiar a pose, one she'd seen in her own mirror for years now. She's still just a child, Lord. This is all my fault, isn't it? Maybe it was the quiet clink-clink of her spoon hitting the china sides as she stirred, but suddenly Hannah reached out, picked up the sugar, and held the bowl out to her mother. Never looking up, she spoke. "Did you want some of this?" Yes," Karen spluttered a little, taking the proffered gift. "Why, yes, thank you, Hannah Lee." "Thank you, Hannah Lee," she berated herself. "Thank you, Hannah Lee. Where did the sweetheart go to? What did you used to call her, anyway? Once she grew out of princess. When did that happen, while we're on that subject?" Shaking her head, she made herself busy, carefully measuring an exact rounded spoonful of the white sweetener and stirring it until every last particle was dissolved. "Lord, give me strength." Karen's silent plea preceded her next words. "Tell me what to do." The thought appeared. Share your day. Of course. "I had the strangest day today," she began, a little too peakily. Hannah never moved. She might as well have been talking to the wall. Karen didn't know just what she expected, but no response at all surely wasn't it. A little less exuberantly, she continued, Yes, my day was really an odd one. Did you ever have a day like that?" Hannah glanced up at her mother. The look on her face made Karen feel like one of the 9-year-olds she used to monitor in the aftercare room. "Well, yes, I suppose we all do, don't we?" She began a third time. "Would you like to hear about it?" The sorting of the game cards had become even more fascinating from all appearances. Hannah, I'm with you. Remember the bridge? Remember, Hannah," he whispered into her heart. Hesitation, then a silent, brief nod met Karen's question. "Well, I was on my way to work this morning," Karen went on. A nod was at least something. "And a tree had fallen across the road I usually take." While Hannah didn't look her way, her hands stilled a bit, and Karen could tell she was at least hearing her, maybe listening. She plugged on. "So I had to take this other road, one I've never taken before, one I've never been on before. I couldn't even remember seeing it from when I was a kid growing up here." She'd begun to prattle and stopped herself. More carefully now, she continued. "Well, the whole rest of the day was a mess. You wouldn't believe all the trouble I had." A nervous laugh. She took the time to draw another long sip from the cup. "But at one point, it started to rain so hard I couldn't even see to drive." This last statement seemed to gain Hannah's attention. Her hands kept fiddling with the cards, but now she at least looked in Karen's direction. Looked her in the eyes, nodding her head, encouraged to get into at least this part of the story. Karen continued. "Yes, it was awful. I must have driven 15 miles out of the way after seeing that downed tree limb. I didn't have a clue where I was. Then the rain started. I finally found a place under an old bridge to pull over, and just sat there for the longest time. I was so tired at that point, so scared I'd never get home again. So scared I'd never get home again." She gave a small laugh at that last statement. It was a story of sorts. "So I just sat there, just listening to the rain after that, and I finally calmed down. And after a while, well, it was kind of nice, actually. I was surrounded with the water, front and back falling in one huge sheet. It made me think of being inside a waterfall for a while." She drew in those last parts, appealing for a spark of sympathy, a stirring towards her from her daughter, at least some sign of interest, knowing the image of hiding under a waterfall would spark Hannah's imagination. She had such a fine imagination. Hannah's head cocked to one side, trying to be polite, trying to listen. "She hasn't wanted to talk to me about anything for as long as I can remember. Now she's telling me about her day?" She wanted to feel compassion for this woman, love for her, and the afternoon's cleansing on the bridge had taken away all the pain. but she still felt frightened to allow herself to feel. Confused, she lowered her eyes to the cards again and began putting the game in its box. Finally, she answered, "Wow, I mean, we had a storm here too, but it wasn't all that bad. Not sheets, anyway. The wind was, but the rain wasn't that hard." Well, it was a start. Karen took another sip of the tea, regrouping her thoughts. I can't tell her about seeing the children. That'll freak her out for sure. A sudden inspiration came to mind. And then even a stranger thing happened. I fell asleep. Another sip. I mean, falling asleep wasn't so strange. I really was exhausted by then. Karen looked up, vying for Hannah's attention again. It was the dream I had. It was definitely a dream, but it was so clear. But then it wasn't really a dream at all. It was more like a vivid memory of something we'd done together. You and I and Daddy a long, long time ago. A sudden clatter, rattle, bang came from the direction of the kitchen. The conversation broken, they both froze, wondering what to do. "It sounds like Nana needs some help out there," Hannah began, starting to rise from her seat. Karen's heart fell. No, Lord, I need more time." "No worries, dears," Anne's cheerful voice cut through the tension. "Just being clumsy, no worries." Crisis averted. The two seated at the table grinned to themselves, then looked at each other. This was Nana at her best, clumsy as an ox, as she'd readily admit herself. Cheerful in spite of everything, the knowing look they exchanged broke something in the atmosphere around them, and Karen picked up with her story. "Yes, the dream. It was about a time, you probably don't remember it, but back when you were only 4, I had brought home a book from the library about a little girl and her brother's first visit to the ocean. You were so enamored by it, you had me read it over and over and over again. You finally memorized it and started reading it yourself." Karen's voice seemed to fade a little into the background, while Hannah's eyes were glued to her mother's lips, continued on with the dream. "This is impossible, Lord," she queried him. No way. How did you? Why did you? Did you?" Her mother's voice broke back in. "So when we left the hotel room that morning, I was happy. We walked down to the waterline, and you and I built a huge sandcastle." Hannah picked up the narration, with caution to her voice. "You made me a moat and filled it with water, and there were little flags flying from the top made out of the napkins and plastic straws, and I wouldn't go in the water." Astonished, Karen looked at her daughter. "You do remember?" Now it was Hannah's turn to wonder just what would freak the other one out. "Not exactly. It's a long story." Kara blinked a few times, her forehead creased, contemplating. "Well, okay, maybe later we can talk more about what you mean." She wanted the moment to come back, so she continued with her own tale. "Yes, well, it ended with us finally coaxing you into the water with us. It was such a wonderful time, such a wonderful memory." She searched for a way to extend it, to make it more important. It was important. It was the way things used to be, the way they still should be. She bent slightly over the table towards Hannah, intense now. "Hannah." Karen spoke so quietly, Hannah had to strain to hear her voice. Unconsciously, she moved her body a little closer, sensing that she needed to hear this, to ignore the red flags flying all over inside her. At least give this a chance. "The feelings will come, Hannah. Trust me." "Hannah, I want you to know," her voice caught. This was so much harder than she could have ever thought. "I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. So sorry." Hannah's head dropped. Her forehead focused back on the game, the table, her hands, anything but her mother's pleading eyes. "I know you don't believe me. I know we've made life awful for you and Evelyn. But Tentatively, Karen reached out and placed one hand softly on her daughter's. We were wrong. Daddy and I were wrong about a lot of things. I see that now. Tennessee, the church, Keith. Oh, especially Keith. We did so many things wrong, and I want to change that. She couldn't look at her eyes. Not yet, but Hannah at least picked up her head, turned it in her mother's direction. I want you to know I had a long talk with the Lord today. Jesus showed me. I realized what I've been doing wrong, how we've hurt you and Evan, how we should have included you so much more. Her voice broke at this point. Tears filled her eyes and coursing down over her stress-reddened cheeks. I want you to know how different I want things to be, how different I feel inside. I used to feel this way when I was your age, before. She stopped here, knowing there was no way, no means to convey to this yet innocent child what she had gone through, what she had supplanted her relationship to God with. No, may she never know these things in person, Lord. Karen sat up straight again, her hands plunged to her lap, twisting together as she searched for a point to re-enter the conversation. Her heart burned, knowing that she couldn't stop there, couldn't balk at telling Hannah what had been weighing on her all during the long way back home again today. So I want you to get to know Jesus too, sweetheart. Not the way the church in Alabama was saying, not the stuff and the programs. To know him, really, who he is, the way I knew him at your age, the way I know him again, now. Even in the midst of her doubt, Hannah could feel the Lord nudging her inside. Soften, Hannah, soften. You can trust me, even if you don't think you can trust her yet, spoke that still small voice deep within her. Her heart was pounding, trying to keep up with the transformation her mother was insisting happened, but she had no real proof yet. Trust me, dear one. The voice was clearly insistent now, unable to resist him. She finally smiled at the sound of his voice, a shy, quiet smile, hardly noticeable. She turned to her mother, the secret within her growing the smile, just a little. I do, Mom. I do know him now. Nana Ann has been talking to Evan and me every Sunday, and Pastor Holsterler has been too. Hannah's eyes brightened now. His love started to flow through her. I do know him, Mom. From just a few weeks ago, I gave my life to him, Evan too. And so the process began. Two of his beloved ones had found a bright new link, one that would eventually repair the chain of love that had once joined them, but which life had weakened, shattered, and broken apart. If the pieces were carefully, skillfully placed together, and just the right pressure applied, their lives would be joined, even stronger than before. All that remained was to leave it to the master blacksmith, submitting to the perfect aim of his hammer. It was a process begun, yes, but begun indeed. Hope, that wonderful, elusive, necessary gift of the Lord, came bursting up inside both of them, and their spirits rejoiced, even though their bruised and battered souls held back in reticence. Karen reached out and held both of Hannah's hands in hers, locking her eyes in her own. No more words were needed for this time. Now it was time to just let the unseen do its job and the seen be quiet. Neither of the two at the table noticed Anne watching the tender scene silently from the doorway. Neither saw the angels gathering up Anne's inner shouts of praise into vessel after vessel, ascending with them swiftly to the Father's throne. They had no idea of the jubilation filling heaven, nor the dancing and rejoicing that was taking place on the sea of glass before him. Loud was the celebration in the highest of heavens. The redeemed without number sang their praise and worship to the great Redeemer, the healer of souls, until the colors of their praise filled the temple. Abba and Adonai exchanged looks of deep satisfaction. Victory had prevailed, a healing had begun, There was much danger that lay in the journey ahead of them. These two souls with still tender, freshly healed wounds, and it would take but one underguarded blow from the enemy to reopen them, to do more damage. But their feet were at least again on the path. With a wave of his hand, angels were sent to encourage, minister, and protect. These two souls were not alone in this. No, never alone. "Hello!" a cheerful voice came drifting through the rooms. "Anne, are you home tonight?" The mood broken, Karen and Hannah parted hands. "I don't think Mama heard. I'll go see who it is," said Karen. "It's Pastor Hostetler. I wonder what he's doing here." Hannah followed her mother along the passageway to the front door. "Come in, Pastor," Karen called to the smiling figure standing on the porch. Come sit down and join us. We were just getting ready for some supper, Mama's famous beef stew." Abram smiled broadly at the invitation and stepped through the door. "Wonderful, just what the doctor ordered, I'd say." He slid his trench coat from his shoulders and laid it over a chair. He fished around in one of the large pockets for something, finally retrieving a colorful paper. "I have something to talk to you all about the VBS week coming up soon." Anne had joined them now, as well as Evan. "Oh, Mommy, Nana Ann, can we go? Mommy, did Daddy give us permission yet?" All eyes turned to Karen. She stopped. He didn't matter at this point. Yes, it's fine that you and Hannah Lee go. It's fine." Abram beamed at Anne, giving her a straight wink. "Well, that's just what I'd like to talk to you all about, dear. Hannah is a little old for the program, so I'd like to see her give us some help in the behind-the-scene jobs. And you, my dear, I've heard a great deal about your creative talents. I wonder if you would be interested in sharing some of them with us." The group made their way back towards the dining room, and the pastor, Hannah, and her mother took their seats. "I have an idea for the final night. The Lord's put it in my head that you might have the talent to write a small play for us, Karen. Would that be something you'd be interested in doing?" Anne had brought the stew out to the table while they had first begun talking, and now she appeared with a set of bowls and spoons. "Will you say grace for us tonight, Abram?" she asked, passing out the dishes. "I'd be delighted, Anne." Grace, Karen thought. Yes, grace. "Oh, lead us all now, Lord. Make a new life for us." She looked up after the prayer. Hannah was smiling at her. Evan was beaming. Anne and Abram had almost comical smiles on their faces. Karen smiled back. New life, new love. Yes, God was good.